Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today for the wraparound session that we're going to have. As you know, I'm from education. My name is James. We can just go around and introduce ourselves if you'd like.
I'm Nick, and I'll be representing the child welfare system today.
Awesome. Hi, Nick.
I'm Adriana, and I'm representing juvenile justice.
Hi, Audrey.
And I'm Denise, and I'll represent healthcare and mental health.
So a little bit of what I was thinking, because I know that the the people who were referring Chiron to our organization here had sent documentation to all of us. I think what we can do going through this is just to go around and voice some of our primary concerns pertaining to Chiron, and then we can move into our recommendations that we have. And then if we have any feedback we want to provide around those recommendations, we can have a discussion after that. And then we can go into some of our interventions that we'd like to do moving forward. Does that work with everyone?
Sounds good to me.
Yes.
Great. So who would like to start?
I can start looking at it through a child welfare lens, and some of the issues that we have seen is Sharon's mother's substance abuse history, the lack of stability at home, his mother's financial issues in regards to her asking and forcing money from Sharon. And the biggest thing I think that causes a lot of the surface level issues that we see in Sharon is his inability to talk with anyone about his sexuality or express his sexuality. So those are some of the key issues that we've seen for Sharon.
And for mental health, I think we are concerned about Sharon being able to develop some solid, caring, dependable relationships. And we'd like to look further at his home environment, any kind of trauma he has experienced up to this point, and just how that is going to impact how he moves forward. We'd like to see some more discussion and observation around his presence in school, his presence outside of school, who he connects with. And we're finding that he's pretty independent, doesn't have a lot of relationships, and we have some concern about that piece of it.
And as far as juvenile justice goes, we're really looking at this from a legal standpoint and understanding that there are potential criminal charges being brought upon Chiron due to the incident that occurred in class. However, we're also really wanting to look at this through a critical race lens and being able to identify the contributing factors of his environment and the way in which that can have impacts on his trajectory, and being able to make sure that we have supports in place to give him the best opportunities available in equitable opportunities.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. For us over here at education, and I think you made a very good point with the critical race lens, because I think that a lot of our concerns are coming through that lens, just because we don't have a lot of adequate resources within the school systems in the district, primarily because our superintendents and our board and the district just doesn't really have a lot of the resources and support from the community, because the community doesn't really get a lot of funding just because of the region and different implications that come from that. I would say that one of our primary concerns, specifically in regards to Chiron, is that there is a good amount of violence that seems to be occurring at school, whether that is racially charged because of different friend groups and things like that. But there is a pretty consistent presence of bullying that's going on, and we don't really have adequate enough resources to address any of these concerns when it comes to violence, when it comes to, even having our educators properly trained in recognizing bullying, mitigating that situation, and getting them the resources and training that they need in order to manage that. So those are some of our primary concerns, especially because of what implications that has for future, opportunities and furthering education, and I mean, honestly, even the completion of education in the lower levels, mid levels, all of that. So there's a lot. So I think that
There is.
I think we have a lot of really good perspectives here, and I would love to go into some of your recommendations. I'd love to hear some of those.
Does anybody want to go first, or you want to just keep going in the same order?
Maybe.
We can do that if you'd like. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Some interventions that the child welfare system has kind of came up with was, and it'll go hand in hand with a lot of these systems. It's a very like cross systems approach, but like first off, trauma informed mental health services for both Sharon and his mother. So the trauma informed care, and not only like with child welfare, isn't just helping the child, it's family reunification, it's family counseling as well. So parenting classes and things like that, because you can't just help the child and then put them back into an unstable home where the family isn't fit to provide for the child. So working with both of them to address their trauma and how it has led to where they are now. And then another intervention we've came up with is for Sharon to have that one-on-one mental health professional working with a therapist where he can work with and open up with about the bullying that you explained, James, and how he's being bullied due to his sexuality for most part, and how he doesn't feel comfortable and he finds himself being quiet all the time because he's not comfortable in his own skin. And you can just see that. So if providing him with that one-on-one as well, where he can express himself and find ways to express himself and feel comfortable in his own skin rather than feeling like he has to hide himself, so he can be who he truly is regardless of how people feel about it. And I think that, along with trauma-informed care with both him and his mother, are two good first steps in the intervention process.
Definitely, I agree with all of that. And to continue with that trauma-informed lens, I think that's going to be a big piece of the interventions and how we approach this relationship with him, as far as providing a safe environment for him and to build that rapport. I have a feeling it's going to take quite a while. So I want to be able to build a team together that will be able to sustain his needs throughout the rest of this year or school, and in what ways we can disrupt this path from school, this incident, and keep him within the school system and provide him that support before he's, arrested or sent to juvenile detention. I would also recommend, we talked about doing the ACEs to kind of like get a better history of where he's coming from, his environment, and also to really look at who's going to be working with him. As a white cisgender female, I'm not sure that I would be the most appropriate. So I'd really want to be mindful about the team that we put together that could provide him support from all sides. I feel like he's really kind of, dealing with a lot of complex identity issues, and I just want to make sure that those are addressed appropriately. And I think one other thought would be, I'd love for him to have, or for us to come up with some type of group scenario, a peer therapy situation where maybe he could find validation in how he's feeling, and maybe at some point feel empowered to help peers within that group. So that would be another recommendation.
Okay. From juvenile justice perspective, we are in a lot of ways, I mean, we definitely touched base on referring for counseling, for some trauma-informed therapy, a referral to child welfare, of course, to address, you know, some of the parental issues, as well, and ensuring that Chiron safety is first and foremost. But we also were planning on recommending a probation officer, an unsupervised probation officer for Chiron, and we will be doing the best within our limitations to, as Denise recommended, address trying to match him with an African-American male, so that he can have some of that male support as well. And then we were going to also recommend participation in a mentorship program in the community, as well as encouraging Chiron to engage in extracurricular activities at the expense of the Juvenile Justice Department. We think it's really important that his time isn't left so open, and providing him with some structure as well as some potential healthy activities for him to engage in as well. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch base on a macro level intervention to address some of this critical race environmental situations that we had discussed, in potentially developing a multidisciplinary anti-racist task force to be able to really in more depth analyze some of the environmental issues, and be able to pool resources in developing advocacy for anti-racist policies, but also potential anti-racist interventions and programs that could potentially benefit Chiron and other young people like him.
Great. Okay, great. For us in education, some of the things that I was thinking about for that, I mean, I've reached out to the Miami chapter of GLSEN and the Miami chapter of, what was their name? National Voices for Equality, Education, and Enlightenment. Both of the two of them, if you're not familiar with GLSEN, it's the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. The two organizations do offer in-school training to faculty, staff, and students. When it comes to equality, diversity, bullying, specifically when it pertains to GLSEN, they do a specific bullying module of training for students and staff in how to minimize that in school, how to recognize it, and how to deal with that. So that, I would say, is one of our primary recommendations, just because we want to give our educators and our staff the proper resources to address this. Because I think that comes at a low cost. I mean, these two organizations work on a donation base when it comes to coming out and training, and a lot of the people who are within the program are trained via volunteer, and they implement via volunteer. And I think that would be an excellent resource for the school, and I mean collectively for the district, because you've got the training and support for those students to recognize it among their peers and to address it effectively, but also the main thing, which is among the educators. The other recommendation that we have is having better internal programming and social work resources and other resources within the school, and honestly within the community, that can be connected to the schools and to those educators and students, because we want communication like we are doing here between our departments, but also local organizations and nonprofits, that maybe a social worker that we might be able to bring in part-time, pro bono or something into the school can be a liaison to those resources, or someone that could potentially do a training for us and be a spokesperson for that, maybe someone who's already in our faculty. So I think those are our two primary things, because we ultimately have the issues of violence going on. We have the issues of aggression, whether that is, like I said, racially charged or charged via neighborhood territories. And we ultimately want to, promote better behavior overall, but also limit bullying and provide proper resourcing to the people that need it. And I think that, this would address a lot of the issues around opportunities in the future, better safety at the schools, better security for the students to, continue their studies, to, come to the people at the school, their educators, or this liaison if they're having issues at home, so that we could then have the proper avenues of support and refer or directly connect those students who are experiencing violence at home or substance use or any other violences or anything neglecting, really, that we could connect them with those supports within your departments, but also within the community if there's organizations that are volunteer-based nonprofit that won't hinder them and their families anymore. So those are education's primary recommendations.
I really like all of these approaches, honestly. I know we're supposed to kind of see which ones wouldn't work, but for you, James, I like the approach of what's the name of the organization again?
GLSEN,
GLSEN.
one of them.
I like that because I think it would help out Sharon's friend a lot, who was in a leader role, and people actually looked up to him, but he wasn't comfortable in his own skin, and yet was the first one to jump Sharon. How do you pronounce his name again?
Chiron.
Chiron.
Yep.
Chiron. And he was the first one to jump Chiron. And he was actually the one that was in love with him at the same time. So
Right.
I think not only would it benefit Chiron, it would benefit other people. Like, I can't remember what his name was, but like him as well, because he's not the only person. What was his name?
I have Kevin.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is Kevin. And I imagine Kevin's not the only one in the entire school that's battling with that, where they can't openly be who they are or be comfortable in their sexuality and in that school dynamic. So I think an organization like that would help not only Chiron, but would help the people like Kevin as well that are resorting to aggression. And then both Adriana and Denise, I like the approach of not only implementing these services like child welfare recommended, but doing it on the aspect of having the right demographic, so you can really make an impact, not just putting someone like a straight white male or a straight white female or whatever it may be in the role to assist Chiron with good intentions, but may already go into it with barriers and obstacles. But if you put someone that comes from a similar area that looks similar to Chiron, someone that already has trusting issues, I think you may be able to break down some of those obstacles a little bit easier.
What comes to mind for me regarding that, okay, sorry, I was reading a little note that I got. What comes to mind to me for that is also, I would say, some I wouldn't call it feedback, because I agree with all of these ideas. I think they're great. But what it sounds like that we're getting at, and I think would be really resourceful, possibly in place of a probation officer, would be a peer support specialist, someone who's like certified as a peer support specialist. And I don't know the legalities regarding this, if he would be required to have that probation officer. I don't know that end of it, but I think that if there's someone who is in addition to that as a peer support, I think that would be beneficial for Chiron, because maybe he won't be able to connect as much with a probation officer because he's his probation officer. So I wonder if a peer support person, in addition to the probation, if that's required, would be a good resource to, where they have been in crime, they have been in like domestic violence situations, substance abuse situations, and they could speak to that from, further down the road, meeting Chiron where he's at. What do we think about that? Any thoughts?
I think that due to the nature of the criminal charge, I think that a probation officer would be unavoidable. However, a piece that I didn't mention, which might change the situation a little bit better, make the situation a little bit better, is that the probation officer, of course I just preferably an African-American male officer who will provide accountability for Chiron. However, will take on more of a role in mentorship and support. So that was a pretty key
Okay.
that I didn't mention. And
Kind
I
of complement the same role.
I think that would be great. I mean, I think it's something that would just have to be observed when that really begins, because we don't know how Chiron is going to react to a probation officer / mentor. I think that's really smart. I think we would want to watch and see how he would respond to that relationship.
I think probation would be a better route though than him going into the juvenile system. Like
Yes.
not necessarily juvenile system, because that would still be probation, but actually going to a facility like he did. I think that did him a lot of harm rather than a probation officer. Yes, you did break the law. I mean, you did go in there and assault someone with a chair. But ultimately, if you kind of see why he did, I don't think he should have went to a facility.
Right. And I think that brings us back to some of our. Oh, I'm sorry, Denise. Were you going to say?
No, that's great. I'm just going to jump in. No, I was just going to reflect on everything that everybody has said. I think we all are in agreement as far as keeping Chiron safe and providing him some support that will lead into his family life, like Nick had mentioned, and then to school and bringing those resources in without requiring a lot of funding that might not be available. And then, as Adriana said, having that probation officer, but having that peer mentor piece, because I think one piece I was missing was his dad's history. So I'm not sure about the probation, that piece, the legal side of it, if that would bring some kind of like resistance or disconnect, or I agree that we should help him be accountable, but I'm also very hesitant and a little cautious about those relationships that we're trying to forge. So Chiron can so he can guide us, I guess, in this process and not bring in a sense of like hierarchy or power, just really to be mindful of who he is and where he's at right now.
Yep, and I think that all involved personnel should be trauma-informed, trained. And so I think that would make a difference as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good Denise and Adriana, because I mean, even in this conversation now, like I just kept going and going and going, and then like as it is in our society, that consideration of mental health just kind of slipped me, which is my apologies, because I mean, we're here because of that prison to pipeline system. We formed this coalition, this group, to address all of these things. So I do think you bring a very good perspective and very good points into this, Denise, regarding this. And yeah, so I appreciate you.
Thank you.
So just for the sake of respecting everyone's time, I was trying to take some notes, and I just kind of want to like recap some of the highlights of some of the interventions that were mentioned. I made sure to pull some from each system, as well as making sure that we have micro, meso, and macro level interventions across the board as well.
Thank you, Adriana.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So starting with micro interventions, I have from the mental health system, trauma-informed mental health services with African-American counselor, if possible. From juvenile justice, an acting trauma-informed probation officer, providing a supportive role, an African-American male, if possible. And then looking at meso level, from child welfare, looking for trauma-informed parenting classes to, no. Sorry. And then from the education perspective, again on meso, would be in school diversity training for staff, but again, having that overall trauma-informed framework that we kind of mentioned at the end. And then to just touch on macro, from all system perspectives, to move forward if in agreement with the Multisystemic Anti-Racist Task Force, totaling 5 interventions.
I mean, I think those are all great. The only thing that I would say is if we don't have the ability to partner him with someone who is Black or African American and male, that we at least ensure that there is cultural competency training from whatever agency or source that we get that from. Just because I think that he could definitely work with anyone. They would just be able to have that power, privilege, and oppression training and knowledge and address that effectively. So, but yeah, I think these are all great. Do we have any objections to these interventions?
No, I like all 5 of
No.
those interventions. I find
I
them
think-
beneficial.
Okay, great.
Yeah.